Well, hello there folks, this is Liaj, and today I am bringing you a rather interesting video for Monster Hunter Rise concerning the game's maps. If you are a veteran of the Monster Hunter series or you happen to know a veteran of the series who won't stop talking about how the old games used to be, then you may just happen to have the piece of trivia that states that some of the maps in Monster Hunter Rise are actually remakes of maps from the old games, particularly Monster Hunter 3. Now in all of the Monster Hunter games before World, all of the maps you would hunt monsters in were actually far more restrictive. Basically, you would have a series of flat, open areas connected to each other by loading screens, so there really wasn't all that much in terms of places to explore. However, we aren't really here to discuss the nuances of map design. Instead, I am here today to examine the particular maps in Monster Hunter Rise that are remakes of the maps from Monster Hunter 3. One of these maps that is a remake is the Sandy Plains, and this is the map that we will be covering in this video. The second map that is a remake is the Flooded Forest, and I will be releasing a second video to cover that one. With that said, let's dive in and compare the old and new versions of the Sandy Plains to see how the team was able to convert a flat, loading screen restricted map into a much more vertical and open one. So here we are in the 3rd generation Sandy Plains. I went ahead and dusted off my Wii U to load up this map in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. We are starting off at the base camp, and we can already see right away that this area shares mostly the same layout as it does in Monster Hunter Rise. Running around the camp, we can get some nice sweeping views of the distant scenery. Obviously these backgrounds are far more detailed in Rise, but we can see that the geography looks quite similar. In Rise, some of you may know about the secret passage tucked away under this arch that gives us a nice shortcut to the main areas. This passage does in fact also exist on our original map, although I didn't end up using it in my recording. Originally, I believe it warped you to some area on the complete opposite side of the map. Here we can get a good look at our base camp. Originally there was no place to change your gear or manage items, but you could sleep in the tent to fully heal yourself. There's also this cool little old Wyverian hanging out at our camp. These guys appeared in random spots in a lot of the old maps, and you could just talk to them to get some free stuff, or sometimes even trade certain items for others. Alright, now to grab a map. You used to need to carry this actual item if you wanted to view your whole map in the old games. For my recording, I could just view the map on my Wii U gamepad, which was useful to hide it on the UI. So we have just entered our first loading zone in 3U. After a loading screen, we would end up in our first area. In Rise, there is no such thing, as the whole map in between areas is traversable, so we need to make up the distance on foot. After passing through this little archway, we are now roughly in the same area in both maps. In both maps, this area is considered Area 1, but the numbering ends up changing for the later areas. For each perspective, I will be following the same route through the whole map so you can see the similarities and differences between map layouts. In the Rise map, we can see all sorts of cliffs and valleys surrounding this area. We can of course easily traverse these areas either as a shortcut to a different area or just to go exploring. Meanwhile, in the 3U map, the edges of this area are basically invisible walls, and the only way to separate areas is to travel down one of the loading zone paths positioned in different directions around the area. Despite being blocked off by a loading zone, we can actually see the rock arch that our base camp is located in from this area. Although the areas are separate, you can oftentimes infer the geography of the surrounding areas by looking at the backgrounds leading off from each path. You might for example see a far-off lake, which lets you know that you will be heading towards a lake area in that direction. We are now entering Area 4 in 3U, or Area 6 in Rise. In both maps, this area is kinda a central hub linking multiple areas. In 3U, there are a total of 5 paths leading off from this area, and these paths are somewhat consistent with the Rise map. Of course, in Rise, you could just jump over a hill to change areas. This sunken area with the ruins is one of the major new additions to the Rise map. In the 3U map, there is no trace of any such thing, although there is this weird little ditch around the edge of the area. Our next destination will be Area 3 for 3U and Area 7 for Rise. In 3U we can see this large majestic tree off in the distance. In Rise we can see what appears to be a similar large tree, although it is considerably less majestic. In both areas here we have ended up in a nice little swampy oasis thing. This area has always been a favorite for our muddy friend Baroth, and in Rise we now have Almudron who loves this area as well. Looks like we can climb pretty close to the big tree in Rise. For 3U, however, that tree still looks quite far off. The additional ruins on top of these cliffs are also another new addition for the Rise map. I like that they ended up doubling down on the idea of showing an ancient civilization for this map. The next area in our tour is Area 2, and this is Area 2 in both maps. Once again in the 3U map we can actually see what appears to be our base camp in the far distance. Shouldn't look too closely at those textures though. So tucked away in this corner in both areas is this little cave. In the 3U map this is a path to Area 7, but in the Rise map this cave isn't actually accessible because it is instead used by large monsters to help them travel between areas. When exiting this area, we will be looping back around to Area 1 for both maps, then we will head back to our central Area 4/6. The 4 areas we are traveling between have formed a loop that I have shown on the screen for each map. In Rise, we have a whole new area that does not exist in 3U in the center of this loop. This is Area 3, and it basically represents the basin formed by the surrounding areas. Getting back to the central area will take a bit longer on the Rise side of things, of course, so let's go ahead and take a few more looks at the additional surrounding areas as we work our way back there. Our upcoming area is Area 8 on both maps, and this is the first of our proper sandy areas. In 3U, this area is considered to be very hot, so we have to have ourselves a cool drink to not take damage in it. Now this is what I would consider one of the more iconic areas in this location, as we've got these distinctive mushroom-shaped structures. These structures are actually anthills, and you can see them being home to these small bug monsters called Alteroth. These Alteroth also happen to be one of the favorite foods of Baroth. When hungry, Baroth has been known to break one of these hills open and start munching on the bugs. Also, while in combat with Baroth in this area, you could trick Baroth into charging into one of the anthills and knocking himself out. I do believe this behavior still somewhat exists in Rise, although I don't think he gets KO'd outright from it. Looking around the edges of this area, we can see the far-off sand dunes. In 3U we mostly see these as a background, but in Rise we can obviously see the actual areas that we will be going to. And thus we have entered the first of the large sand dune areas. This is Area 9 on both maps. In the Rise version we have a few extra things like rock spires, which also serve as environmental traps for large monsters. On this side of the dunes, the Rise map actually has an extra path leading away from it. This path leads to another exclusive area that is not in the 3U map. We will explore that later. In both maps we can see this same conspicuous patch of cacti. This basically exists for the sole reason of giving Diablos something to eat when hungry. In case you didn't know, Diablos is an herbivore. And here we are approaching another of the more recognizable landmarks, this large stone arch. Obviously this arch has gotten a bit of a makeover in Rise, but you can definitely recognize them as the same feature. Moving to the edge of this area, we can see in the Rise version that we've got a bunch of ruins scattered down this chasm. We can of course jump down and go to these ruins in Rise, but in 3U, it appears that the chasm is bottomless all the way around. Real quick, let's speed things up since it takes quite a while to cross this whole area in both games. We can actually see that in both maps we have this bridge linking the dune areas. Even though it's a loading screen in 3U, we can still see that we have crossed this bridge when we load in on the other side. In the Rise area we can't actually jump off the edge in all spots here, but there is a small landing that will take us down to the ruins. Meanwhile in 3U there does happen to be a suspicious little ledge on the edge of this chasm. You'll have to check that out later. Briefly in the distance, you can catch a glimpse of the sandfish Delex in the 3U map. These guys have in fact been around since then. Originally, these fish had a tie-in to one of the major monsters in 3U known as Gen Moran, which was basically a massive sand whale. On the far edge of the dune area, we once again have another path in Rise that did not exist in 3U. As we can see in the distance, this path would take us to the area with the large tree. Meanwhile, we can see two more paths in both maps, one leading into the cavernous underground and one taking us back to Area 8 with the anthills. Alright, now let's run across the dunes and head back to that path leading to the chasm. In Rise, this takes us down a nice little slide, but in 3U, we jump straight into the abyss. And here we are in Area 11 for 3U, or Area 12 for Rise. As you can see, these ruins are even present in the 3U map, so we might be able to assume that the team decided to expand upon the ruin scene here in other parts of the map for the Rise remake. Of course, in Rise, these ruins are also completely traversable, and there's a good amount of exploring you can do through them here. Real quick in the 3U map, we will take a peek down one of these dark passages. Huh, that somehow got us back up to the dunes. Guess we won't think about that one too much. We will now move on to another one of the underground areas. Of course, we still got to do a bit more legwork to get there in Rise. This is Area 7 in 3U and Area 11 in Rise. This area is a neat little watering hole that, like the area we covered back in the beginning, sort of serves as a nexus to connect a bunch of the different areas. A bunch of the cave entrances we saw in the previous above ground areas will usually end up leading us here some way or another. If you're familiar with the Rise map, you may have had lots of experience with getting lost around this area and trying to figure out which cave passage leads to each above ground area. In 3U, we can see the obvious exit to the sand dune area, but in Rise, it's kinda hard to tell which passage will take us there without going all the way down it. I guess you could just look at the map though. From this area, we will be heading into the heart of the caves. For the 3U map, we have already jumped into the loading zone that will take us there, but for Rise, this area is a bit more out of the way. We will actually be backtracking to the ruins and taking a tiny little passage hidden among them to reach these caves. In 3U, this cave area is designated as Area 6, but in Rise it doesn't actually get a number, being an area that is too cramped for a large monster to want to hang out in. There is a camp located above these caves, however. In both games, this is a great area for mining a bunch of ore. In 3U, we can see that this area is also used as a little camp for the wild cats. If they steal your stuff, you'll likely find it in this stash. Uh-oh, looks like they're after me now. In the Rise map, this area can be tricky to figure out where the entrances and exits are. This great wire bug here makes for a good way to get yourself back to the surface. At this point in the recording, I'm pretty sure I was just running around to avoid the cats, so I finally decided to deal with them. Ah, don't you dare take my max potion. And let's just fast forward a bit because I have way too much footage of this area and I'm out of things to talk about. It is certainly a cool looking area though. So leaving this area, we are heading to our final area on the 3U map, which is the Jaggi Den. This is Area 5 for 3U and Area 4 for Rise. Due to the layout of the Rise map, we gotta travel quite a bit farther to get there, so our 3U self will just be clearing out the place while we make our way there in Rise. Alright, after jumping over a few cliffs, we have arrived. This area is kinda like a nest for the Jaggi monsters, and in 3U we even had the great Jaggi boss monster. Could this monster possibly be added to Rise sometime in the future? Well, I kinda doubt it. Along this back wall we can see a few small alcoves, which we could assume are part of the whole monster nest. In 3U we can look up and see these, but in Rise of course we can actually just go up and climb on them. Moving on, if we exit this area from one side, we will have a path that takes us back to the sand dunes. Meanwhile, zip on over to the other side and this will take us to the central area in 3U. In Rise, however, this layout is slightly different. If we continue forward, we can loop around to Area 1. If we turn right, however, this doesn't take us straight to the central area, but instead we will end up in a new area that doesn't exist in 3U. This pond area is Area 5, and it is an area that fills the gap between a bunch of other areas. On the 3U map, this would be located between areas 4, 5, and 8, although I'm sure the original map wasn't designed for that particular kind of spatial continuity. Alright, we will end our tour back in the central area 6 in Rise and 4 in 3U. This will conclude our tour. I hope you all enjoyed. I had a whole lot of fun making this video. For me, it was definitely a bit of a trip down memory lane to revisit the old map. Plus, it was super cool to see just how much attention to detail went into converting the old nebulous layout into a completely cohesive area, while preserving so many of the features of the original. Hopefully soon I should also be releasing another of these map comparisons for the Flooded Forest map. That one will be an interesting one to see because the Flooded Forest was one of the maps that originally had underwater zones. Anyways, if you've enjoyed the video, please go ahead and leave a like and subscribe if you would like to show your support. So for now, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.